I find technology difficult.
And here we go. Share screen. Share. And put it on big.
Fabulous.
Everybody see that all right?
Yeah.
And if guys, if I can just ask you to put it on mute we will have questions towards the end, just so that I get a bit of a free flow of the recording. Punishment and extinction. The final session in the winter series covering the 4 principles of effective and ethical training. And some people might argue, what is punishment doing in a presentation on effective and ethical training? It's in because whether we like it or not, punishment is in action regularly. It's going on around us all the time. It is a part of natural behavior. Extinction is also happening, whether we like it or not. And they are misunderstood. There are myths and misconceptions around them. And we're going to be looking at them in more detail so that we have a clearer understanding of why things go wrong and how they form part of any training program, whether we like it or not, essentially. A little bit of a recap, what we've covered so far. We've covered personal philosophy, personal training philosophy, and our values, and how what we believe and what we value is going to influence our choice and our training. Again, often at an unconscious level, and part of this series of presentations is really to raise awareness of how strongly what we believe and what we value can influence our choices in terms of who we're going to seek out, who we're going to listen to, what we're going to ignore, what we're going to possibly be unaware of simply because we don't put it at the top, or we just haven't been actually open to receiving some of this stuff. We've also looked in detail at reinforcement, and we've discussed the fact that there is positive and negative reinforcement, and they both refer to the mathematical term, which is addition of something or subtraction of something, and the outcome is the same. If you're using negative or positive reinforcement, you are increasing the likelihood of a behavior. So we clarified, how that's occurring in nature. Again, people assume that positive reinforcement is man-made, and we looked at natural examples of positive reinforcement. And we looked at how we can harness that to get better outcomes for our horses. So, where to next? The final 2 principles are not well known. They're not often discussed in any training clinics or workshops. I've not heard them referred to. They are influential and they're underrated. And as I said, the myths and misconceptions around them primarily stem from language and meaning, and ultimately people's perception of those words. And I think we did talk about this in terms of behavioral science terminology, and then mainstream use of those same words. And even we talked about positive and negative in mainstream means good and bad. And there's a lot of confusion around that. When we start talking about positive reinforcement, people think that it's good and negative reinforcement is bad. We get the same issues around punishment. You know, you mentioned punishment. I'm going to use a punishment procedure, and alarm bells go off. And it's a very different way of talking about punishment than if I was going into a classroom and telling or saying, I'm going to punish somebody. Punishment in mainstream is often also influenced by people's beliefs and values. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So what we're going to cover tonight is, as I said, the myths around punishment, a clear behavioural definition. We're going to look at the misapplication of punishment, extinction and how that works, and why we need to find out what's reinforcing an unwanted behaviour. The final point is that need to fill the gap when we're looking at trying to stop a behaviour. And again, I'll expand on that, but we can't have a vacuum. So if we're going to try and reduce the behaviour, or ultimately, as the word implies, extinguish a behaviour, stop it, we have to be aware that you can't have a vacuum. Something will pop into that gap. And probably the classic example for people will relate to is when you're trying to adjust people's eating behaviours or smoking behaviours or gambling behaviours. You stop gambling, you take up drinking. You stop drinking, you take up gambling. You stop eating, you take up smoking. Very, very common cycle, because you haven't looked at that gap that you're going to be creating. Punishment. The definition of punishment is any stimulus that reduces the likelihood of a behaviour. Interestingly enough, it is the outcome that determines if something is punishing. So if you get a reduction in the behaviour, whatever you did is punishing. Another important factor to remember is that the punishment must follow the behaviour. So you get a behaviour, there's a punishment, a stimulus, and the behaviour starts to drop off. That tells us that whatever you did, whatever was applied, is a punisher for that behaviour. Going back to mainstream terminology and confusion and what we think is punishing doesn't mean it necessarily is. So it's really important to think about it in terms of what is the outcome I'm getting. I could tell you tons of stories around things that are labelled as punishment that don't work. And we see that generally. A really, really good example was a teacher that was working with an autistic child. And she was doing one-on-one sessions with him and was reinforcing what she thought she was doing, was reinforcing, adding positive reinforcement in the form of praise and a little rub on the shoulder. And somebody came in because she was saying he was getting worse, his behavior was getting worse, he wasn't responding. And the person that observed this spoke to the teacher about why she was doing the arm touching. And they removed that, she stopped the arm touching, and they noticed an improvement in the behavior. So the arm touching of this child was actually punishing for him. And so the confusion was this teacher thought it was really nice to just give him a little rub and reassurance, but had actually misread the outcome. So it really is very important to think about what you are doing that you think is punishing. look at the outcome, because they don't always match up. Timing is absolutely crucial in any delivery of punishment. It has to immediately follow the behavior. Now, this will explain why so much of our punishing procedures in mainstream fail miserably, because they take so long to be implemented. A classic example is being convicted of a crime and not being sent to prison or being tried or whatever for 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months. We know it has to be immediately following the behavior. The longer the gap, the less likely it is to have an impact on that behavior. I've put in bold here, particularly, don't confuse punishment with retribution and atonement. And this is where we have breakdowns in, again, day-to-day use of the word punishment. It's usually linked to somehow this person's going to pay for something. There's going to be an atonement. It needs to be delivered without emotion, without layers of stuff that doesn't apply to the behavior, if that makes sense. So this is where we enter that realm of, people get very heightened and emotional about the term punishment. Another confusing factor is you've also got negative and positive punishment. And there's actually some great, just Google, and there's some great grids, showing how that works. But essentially, it's exactly the same as negative and positive in terms of maths. Negative is the removal of something that is punishing. Positive is the addition of something that's punishing. An example of negative punishment might be the loss of privileges, access to TV, access to your phone, whatever. Positive punishment more commonly is, of course, physical punishment, but it can be the presence of something that's not desired, loud music, for example. It doesn't have to be necessarily physically being hit. I've just got a couple of examples to show you, to have a think about which type of punishment is at work. And this is in terms of natural examples of punishment. Because again, we're often thinking that we associate it with artificial, sort of people influencing behavior in animals, but animals actually do respond and punish each other for unwanted behaviors. The mare and foal example is, whether it's happening or not, it just looked like it could possibly be happening, is, the foal's barged into the mother, unwanted behavior, the mother pushes the foal away. Positive punishment. And another example here could be physical punishment in terms of a horse biting and chasing a horse that's barged them or encroached on their space. And it's going to reduce the likelihood of that horse doing the behavior again. I encourage people to think, because this is where the confusion lies, think long and hard about this. Daily life punishment is at work all around us. I was just brainstorming some examples that, in life where you do the right thing and sometimes you get punished for it. We misapply punishment horrifically in daily life. The one that leapt out at me, and I probably see lots of nodding, is tax, right? People go to work, they're doing the right thing, getting a job, they're not sitting around, you know, PC out the window here, but you know what I mean. And, you know, they get taxed. The harder you work, the more money you earn, the higher the tax you pay. Okay. We've also get examples of negative punishment in terms of fines. You know, you speed, something gets removed. Other punishments, of course, are you commit a crime and something's added, such as time in prison. Another one that's underrated, that is very common, and we've seen it recently, recent events, and it's used in prison. It's probably one of the most dreaded of all punishments, which is really strange, and that's solitary confinement or social exclusion. And that's a really, really powerful punisher. And it's been used historically through time to get compliance and impact on people. So you don't necessarily have to be physically violent in delivery of punishment to have quite an impact on people. I also put in there thinking of examples in animals' lives, horses' life, where he does the right thing, where the horse does what's been asked, or the animal, and I'm thinking of a specific example that I've seen a lot of, and then they often get punished for it. And it usually involves a delayed response to something that's been asked of the animal. And the one that leaps out for me is catching the horse. So the horse has either been running around or perhaps trotted off, but then comes back, and people punish that behavior in either you know, jerking on the lead rope. You often see it with dog owners, slow recall from a dog, the dog comes back and they get yelled at. So we have to be really careful that we aren't punishing it, the very behavior that we want, just because it didn't occur in the time frame that we wanted it. Okay, so it's a bit of a reality check for us. We do it with each other, we do it in relationships, we do it with our children. You know, we finally get a response and we go, oh, at last, you know, now you do it. And you know, the behavior analyst in me is going, no, bite your tongue. So yeah, misapplication of punishment can cause issues, and we need to watch out for it. So again, I've got some examples here for you to have a look at. Punishment in action. This one, it's a bit random, but thinking about it logically, you know, we call our horse, he's got free access to grass, he's having a great time, he comes to us, we lead him off, and we make him work really hard. So he's done the right behavior, he's come, and often it's not necessarily a pleasant experience that follows on from there. This one, you may not be able to see it. I mean, I only knew this because I did work with trotters at one point. There's a line, there's a stick, this is actually a pole running down, and if the horse bends one way, they get jabbed in the mouth. So this is, you know, you do the wrong behavior and you get a poke, basically. So negative punishment, removal of something that you like. Positive punishment, the addition of something you don't like. Extinction. Again, you probably won't have heard this word. It's not common outside of behavior analysis. It's not a common term, but you will have probably encountered people talking about how to stop tantruming children. You just let them tantrum. You make sure they're safe, and it's commonly associated with ignoring. So so the mainstream, just ignore it and it'll go away. The important thing to remember with extinction is you need to know what is currently reinforcing the behavior in order to extinguish a behavior. So with the tantruming, it's usually attention, any physical contact, any conversation, even if it's a conversation that says stop tantruming. And therefore, by removing that, by stopping talking to them, stopping giving them attention, you are attempting to extinguish the behavior. So it's the removal of reinforcement to reduce a behavior. And when do we use extinction? We use extinction when we have got a clear pathway. We know what is reinforcing that behavior. It's part of a programmed approach, and we have to ensure that we can be consistent in controlling the reinforcement. And this is why it is a biggie. It is very difficult to control access to reinforcement consistently. And we know this because we're in the applied setting, we're in the real world where we're trying to stop giving the child attention, and then grandma turns up and, how can you ignore it? And they're rushing in, and, it all goes out the window. And the hardest behavior to extinguish is a behavior that's maintained by occasional reinforcement, which is a classic example is gambling. Occasionally it pays out. The machines, we just keep going, putting in that. Every now and then they pay out. So we just keep persisting. If you're trying to extinguish that sort of behavior, you are on a mission. So I've kind of just covered that, what we need to consider and why. We need to consider how we can control the reinforcement. We need to consider why we are trying to reduce the behavior. And this, I think I've got it coming up, is a big difference between a behavior analyst planning a behavior change program and somebody that just calls them a behaviorist or a behavioral expert. We have a duty of care, a code of ethics. We have to ensure that we know why we're doing this. We can't just be doing it because the owner says so or the parents say so. It has to benefit our client, benefit the horse in some way. And the last one is another, ethical consideration. Best practice is not to use extinction in isolation. It's to teach an appropriate replacement behavior. So you might be trying to extinguish tantruming in a child, for example. Alongside that, you want to be thinking, well, I need to give more attention and reinforce the child when they're doing appropriate stuff. So that's best practice. Some random examples of what could potentially be natural examples of extinction. And this doesn't look like a wild horse at all, but in the wild, the horse would naturally extinguish feeding behavior from the foal during weaning. Reinforcement would be removed, and the foal's tendency to feed off the mother would be extinguished over time. This one, I just thought, I pondered this one. A horse grazing at head height, no, not grazing, sorry, munching, foraging at head height. So we've got a change in behavior maybe the grass has dried up, run out, and lowering the head to graze has actually been partially extinguished, and the animal is now foraging at a higher level for food. So when it just is interesting to just challenge yourself and go, where are the examples of this in nature? The change in behavior, extinguishing a previously reinforced behavior, lowering the head to graze, there's no grass, the horse responds by seeking reinforcement at a higher level, and a new behavior is created. So going back to what's reinforcing the behavior, and I kind of covered this. This is what sets behavior animals apart, and this is the ethical aspect of this procedure. We have to be sure we can control what's reinforcing the behavior. We have to investigate it. Why is this behavior occurring? Prior to, there's a very fascinating, interesting history, that's another presentation in itself, on when behavior modification became behavior analysis. And it was in direct response to many behavior programs being put in place that were unethical. So we realized, 100 odd years ago, that we could change people's behavior by controlling for reinforcement, by punishment, by whatever. But we were lacking the ethics around it. And we were lacking the understanding that it had to be for the benefit of the person, not for the people around that person. And behavior analysis grew out of that. So behavior modification is dated now, and we don't use that term very often because it implies no ethical consideration. We're just modifying a behavior. We need to consider the client and their needs, and the horse's welfare comes first. If we're trying to look at a behavior that needs to be reduced, we need to be looking at what is the horse gaining from that behavior. And, there's multitudes of behaviors that we see. I mean, sometimes on Facebook pages, my horse does this, my horse does that. How can I stop it? Our response is, how do we stop it? There is a bit in between, which is, why is he doing it? And we need to understand that. So if we go back to the drinking and the eating and the gambling behaviors of people, we question, why is the person engaging in that behavior? What is the reinforcer what is driving that behavior? Because then we can replace it with something more appropriate. And it's exactly the same with the horse. Teaching a replacement behavior, usually, and this is where it gets complicated, we want to try and give them the same reinforcing outcome, if possible. So it does get complicated with animals, because often what we're trying to do is to get them to do something that we want them to do. And this is where you get into that, welfare versus what we want to achieve. But it's challenging you just to think a little bit broader and think about what the animal is getting from that disruptive or that unwanted or undesired behavior, however you frame it. And finally, just a reminder again that extinction on its own, it used to be used in behavior modification techniques. It used to be used in isolation, just remove the reinforcement. But now best practice, ethical best practice, is to teach a replacement behavior. So if you've got the tantruming child, just for simplistic ease of simplicity, you would be teaching the child to ask for time or ask for a break. for instance. So if the child's tantrum enables them to escape from having to do their chores, you would teach them to say, I don't want to do that. They probably still have to do it, but that's where you would start. Okay, so you've got to teach a replacement behavior. So this is a challenge. This is complicated. It can be simplistic, but it can also be complicated because we need to be considering, as I said, the reinforcement. We also need to consider how strong that reinforcement is for that animal. I'm thinking of animals, horses that won't go into a float, for example, horses that won't go past something really scary. You know, that drive, that reinforcement, that escape behavior is really strong. So if you're going to train a replacement behavior, your reinforcer has to overpower that desire to escape. And that's where we often mismatch, if that makes sense. And we did touch on this, you know, I'm not going to work for a day in a job for a bar of chocolate. You know, it's got to match the effort. So the effort involved has got to be matched with a decent size reinforcement. The other thing to consider if you're going to train a replacement behavior is don't make it too complicated. Can the horse actually do it? So if you're going to try and train them to do something to replace the unwanted behavior, make sure it's fairly straightforward. Don't set yourself up or set your horse up for failure. So, you know, I chose this photo, I guess, from the being able to catch the horse. Make sure that potentially when you do catch the horse, that there's a lot of reinforcement, assuming the horse likes to be stroked, and possibly also another thing is let them go, do some random. I've talked to people with dog recall about this. Do random times where you just go out, catch your horse, and then let him go again. So it just gets you thinking about what's in it for the horse and what outcome they actually want, and how you can work with that to ultimately get what you want. Another factor to consider, and this is this is so hard for us. It was a mind shift for me, is avoid correction as much as possible. And you see it done a lot. You see it done, people going, no, don't do that. You don't want to do that. Do this. Leave out the don't want to do that and just go do this. It is very hard, very hard. You want to set your horse up for success. You want to focus on what you want, and you want to reinforce, acknowledge the desired behavior. So this is where the power of applying positive reinforcement, and we talked about this last week, can start to overtake your life, because you will suddenly start to look for things that you want, look for outcomes you want, look for ways to use it, not just with your horse. Now, I chose this video specifically because there are multiple opportunities for me to be adding in correction, because Jackson decides to offer a variety of behaviors. I did this video to demonstrate target training, and he decided that he would perform and add in a few little extras. He also has the tendency to still just try, is she just going to give me something for doing one of my old party tricks? And just notice that I don't go overboard and start correcting him. I'm focused on what I want him to do, because the science behind that is, if you're reinforcing something, the other stuff will go away, which is not a very scientific way of explaining it, but it does logically make sense. If you're commenting, reinforcing, and acknowledging what you want, the other behavior will naturally reduce. Okay, so I'll just play a little bit of it.
Hi, so today we're
I
going
don't know
to
if I can
be
actually control
looking at how to start your horse
the
off with
sound.
a target and some various.
So he's
ways
already
to
sort of
use
just,
it
oh,
in
I want to do
day-to-day
stuff.
training.
She's
So
talking
the
to
initial
some,
process
talking to a camera.
is getting your horse to touch the target with his muzzle.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll try this.
And yes, we're still having fun and games with the leg lift, but I'm going to begin with that. So I'm going to present the target and I'm going to ask Jackson to touch it. And wait for the foot to go. Target.
So multiple
Take
things I could have
target away.
corrected.
And give him the reinforcement. Target. Take it away and give him reinforcement. Now you'll notice that I'm still trying to keep that distance, but I'm
Goes the leg
presenting the
again.
target, holding the end of the stick. Target. If I was having the problem that you can see potentially you could have, which is the horse coming towards you, I would be positioning myself more so that the target is between me and the horse.
Up goes the leg again.
Target.
So just examples of potentially where I could have corrected. I could have stopped it and said no. I could have told him to stand. And what I'm doing in that process is I'm missing opportunities to reinforce behavior that I want. Okay. And for some reason, we do have this innate drive to want to correct behaviors. So it's quite interesting to challenge yourself. And I definitely, it's still there sometimes, you know, you just want to call it out. But in that example, I just thought, yeah, you end up missing opportunities to reinforce what you want. So if you frame it that way, it becomes less about ignoring unwanted behavior and more about reinforcing desired behavior. Key points tonight. We've covered a lot. I don't know if people have sort of got a hang of what punishment is all about and why it's really important. Remember, it's defined by the outcome, and the outcome should be a reduction in a behavior. If you're doing something that you think is punishing, but it's not impacting on the behavior, it's not punishment. Okay. There is also the important aspect of understanding when you can misapply it and punish behaviors that you actually want. So be aware of that. If you're going to try and use extinction, which is removal of reinforcement, think about using it in conjunction with a positive reinforcement program, such as training and replacement behavior, so that you're giving the animal the opportunity to earn and learn something else. Avoid correction as much as possible. Focus on training what you want. And see it. I often reframe it to people, rather, as I just said before, rather than ignoring it, you are focusing on increasing a behavior that you want. Put all your energy into that. And I've been using that phrase a lot recently. Be the change you want to see. Apply it, have a look at it in daily life. Catch yourself, notice examples of, people punishing other people, often inadvertently, by their response to someone's behavior. It's quite revealing when you start investigating that. So what's next? And this is my quote that I finish up with, whatever you do next matters. And always try to do something after an event, or after you've done some training, or after you've been to a presentation. Always try and follow it up. One of the ones that I've really worked hard on since clinics back in, it was in April and May, wasn't it? April and May, is to stay connected with people. Training in isolation, especially when you're doing something slightly different, can be punishing. Stay connected and think about ways that you can stay connected in this group. We've got the Facebook page, and share what you're doing. Share what you're doing. I've got a training challenge for you. I will send you this slide. Think about a behavior, and this could be a behavior for you or a behavior for your horse that you want to increase. And think about how you might go about it using positive reinforcement. So you want to see more of something. How are you going to use positive reinforcement to increase that behavior? Another one, think about a behavior you want to decrease. Maybe it's yourself, maybe it's something that your horse is currently doing. How might you do this using an ethical approach to behavior reduction? Training an alternative behavior. And then lastly, I have got my Patreon page, which is another way that people can keep connected, which I need encouragement to keep going. And I am going to be offering more events like this, videos. I've got videos and tutorial type videos, some digital downloads, and also offering discounts to people for clinics and events. And I will send you that slide so you've got the link. That's the end of the series. I can't believe we finished. Wow, I've done it. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to stop recording, if I can figure out where that is. And stop recording.